Chronicles of Narnia, Book 2, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Chapter 1. Lucy looks into a wardrobe. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. They had no wife and lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Marcady and 3 servants. Their names were Ivy, Margaret, and Betty. They did not come into the story much. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair, which grew over most of his face, as well as on his head, and they liked him almost all at once. But on the first evening when I came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd-looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him, and Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it. As soon as they had said good night to the professor and had gone upstairs on the first night, the boys came into the girls' room and they talked it all over. "We've fallen on our feet and made no mistake," said Peter. "This is going to be perfectly splendid. That old champ will let us do anything." "I think he's an old dear," said Susan. "Oh, come of it," said Edmund, who was tired and pretending not to be tired, which always made him bad-tempered. "Don't go on talking like that." "Like what?" said Susan. "And anyways, it's time you were in bed." "Can't talk like mother," said Edmund. And who are you to say when I go to bed yourself?" "Hadn't it all be better that we all go to bed?" said Lucy. "There's sure to be a row if we are talking in here." "No, there won't," said Peter. I'll tell you, this is the sort of house where no one's gonna mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes from the walk from here down to the dining room. Any amount of stairs and passages in between." "What's that noise?" said Lucy. It was a far larger house than she had ever been in before, and the thought of all those long passages and rows of doors leading to empty rooms was beginning to make her feel a little creepy. "It's only a bird, silly," said Edmund. "It's an owl," said Peter. "This is going to be a wonderful place for birds." "I shall go to bed now. I say, let's go and explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see those mountains as we came along? And in the woods, there might be eagles, and there might stags, and there'd be hawks, badgers, and Lucy's." "Badgers," said Lucy. "Foxes," said Edmund. "Rabbits," said Susan. But when the morning came, there was a steady rain falling, so thick that when you looked out at the window, you could see neither the mountains nor the woods, nor even the stream in the garden. "Of course it would be raining," said Edmund. They had just finished their breakfast with their professor and were upstairs in the room he had set apart for them, a long, low room with 2 windows out in one direction and 2 in another. "Do stop grumbling, Ed," said Susan. 10 to 1, it'll clear up in an hour or so, and in the meantime, we're pretty well off. There's a wireless and a lot of books." "Not for me," said Peter. "I'm going to explore the house." Everyone agreed to this, and this was how the adventures began. It was the sort of house that you never seemed to come to the end of, and it was full of unexpected places. The first 2 doors they tried only led into spare bedrooms, as they had expected that they would. But soon they came into a very long room full of pictures, and they found a suit of armor. And after the room was all hung with green, was a hop with 1 corner, and came 3 steps down and 5 steps up, and then a kind of a little upstairs hall. That door led into a balcony, and then the whole series of rooms that led into each other, and were lined with books. Most of them very old books, and some bigger than the Bible in a church. And shortly after, they looked into a room that was quite empty except for 1 big wardrobe, the sort that had a looking glass in the door. There was nothing else in the room at all except a dead blue bottle on the windowsill. "Nothing there," said Peter, and they all trooped out again, all except Lucy. She stayed behind because she thought it would be worthwhile trying the door of the wardrobe, even though it felt almost sure that it would be locked. To her surprise, she opened it quite easily, and 2 mothballs dropped out. Looking into the inside, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long fur coats. There was nothing Lucy liked much as the smell and feel of fall. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in among the coats and rubbed her face amongst them, leaving the door open, of course, because she knew that it was very foolish to shut oneself into any wardrobe. Soon she went farther and found that there was a second row of coats hanging up behind the first one. It was almost quite dark in there, and she stepped her arms and stretched out in front of her, so as not to bump into her face in the back of the wardrobe. She took a step farther, in 2 or 3 steps, always expecting to feel wood against the tips of her fingers, but she would not feel it. "This is simply an enormous wardrobe," thought Lucy, going still farther and pushing the soft folds of the coat aside to make room for her. Then she noticed that there was something crunching under her feet. "I wonder if that's more mothballs," she thought, stopping down to feel with her hand. But instead of feeling the hard smooth of the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. "This is very queer," she said, and went to a step or 2 farther. Next moment she found that what was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard, rough, even pricklier. "Why, this is just like the branches of trees," explained Lucy, and then she saw that there was a light ahead of her. No, not a few inches away where the back of the wardrobe ought to be, but a long way off. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later, she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood in nighttime, with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, and she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe, and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out. She had, of course, let the door open, for which she knew that it was a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed to be still daylight there. "I can always get back if anything goes wrong," thought Lucy. She began to walk forward. Crunch, crunch, over the snow and through the wood toward the other light. In about 10 minutes, she reached it and was found in a lamppost. She was staring at it and wondering why there was a lamppost in the middle of a wood, and wondering what to do next. She had a pitter-patter of feet coming toward her, and soon after that she noticed a very strange person stepped out from among the trees into the light of the lamppost. He was only a little taller than Lucy himself, and carried over his head an umbrella, white with snow. From the waist upward he looked like a man, and from the legs he was shaped like a goat's. The hair on them were glossy black. But instead of feet, he had goat hoofs. He also had a tail, but Lucy did not notice this at first because it was neatly caught up over the arm that held the umbrella so as to keep it from trailing in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler around his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant little face with a short pointed beard and curly hair. And out of the hair there was stuck 2 horns, one on each side of his forehead, one of his hands, other on his arms, several brown paper parcels. With what the parcels in the snow, it looked just as if he had been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a fawn, and when Lucy gave such surprise that he dropped all his parcels. "Goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the fawn. That is Chapter 1 of the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Book 2.